Welcome to the quick demo video of the Adaptive Interfaces MCE100 Mode C encoder. For this quick demo, we're simply going to cover the functions of the instrument, the options settings, and the use of the front panel buttons. First of all, the functions that are available in the normal operating mode of the instrument are as follows, and they're listed above the altitude display, and they also have an accompanying indicator light to let you know which function you happen to be in. Right now we're in the alt function, which is the normal default function for the instrument, and that's when it reports its altitude, basically an altitude that's corrected by a barometer setting and available in 10-foot increments. The next function is the Mode C function, or MC function. In this function, the display will be showing the raw altitude information that's normally being sent to a transponder. This is a Mode C altitude, and therefore it is shown only in 100-foot increments, and it is not corrected by a barometer setting, and it is always based on a barometer setting of standard pressure of 29.92 inches of mercury. The next two functions are the functions that allow you to set the barometer setting of the instrument for the normal altitude display. The first setting, BAR, is a direct setting of the barometer, and that's based on information that you would get from an ATIS report or from a control tower when you request airport information. The second way of setting the barometer is the FLD, or field altitude setting. In this case, if you're sitting on a run-up pad and you know the exact altitude of the field, you can actually enter that value, and then the computer inside the instrument will calculate the barometer based on the altitude that you've given it and the local air pressure. The last function is the AA function, or the altitude alert function. This is a function that allows you to set an altitude alert mode when you're at a desired cruising altitude and have the instrument warn you if you drift 200 feet too high or 200 feet too low of your desired cruising altitude. And we'll kind of go over that in a minute. The buttons on the instrument, there are 4 of them. The first button is the function button, and that is used to step through the various functions of the instrument. The next 2 buttons are the up and down buttons, and when the instrument is set for a front panel control of its display brightness, and it's being operated in either the altitude or the Mode C mode, those buttons will actually control the brightness of the display. We can show that right now. We can brighten the display or dim the display. And right now we'll leave the display setting on dim because it works best with the video. The last button is the AA, or altitude alert button, and that button has 2 functions. It can set you into your altitude alert mode, and it can also be used as an enter button when you're changing various options and values on the instrument. We'll start off with the functions, and right now we are showing the function of altitude, or ALT. We are here in Colorado, and our altitude of adaptive interfaces is 4,970 feet. This is an altitude that's reached by measuring air pressure and calculating the altitude and then correcting the altitude by the barometer setting, much as you would with a regular mechanical altimeter. The next function is the Mode C function. This shows the altitude that is actually being sent to a transponder. If you notice, it's a little bit different. That's because it's based on a standard pressure of 29.92 inches of mercury, and it's also given in 100-foot increments. What will happen is the air traffic control facility, after interrogating your transponder, will see that altitude and correct it based on the air pressure where its radar shows that the aircraft is flying. The next function, and what happened here is we actually jumped back to the altitude function, and the instrument is designed to do that. It will only stay in the other functions or the options settings for about a minute, and it will bring you back to the main altitude setting. That's so that you don't accidentally leave it in a different mode and have confusing numbers when you're trying to read your altitude. Let's go back through that. We'll use the function button to step through. Again, this is our Mode C altitude. Our next function is the barometer setting, And right now we have a barometer of 30.26 inches of mercury. The next setting is the field altitude setting. And the field altitude setting can be adjusted in 10-foot increments based on a known altitude, normally where you would be, where you would measure that you would know the altitude of an airfield or at the run-up pad. Last function is the AA function, and we'll get there by going back to the altitude function, and we can engage the altitude alert function as follows. You'll see that the indicator light shows that we're now in altitude alert mode, and that is an option with the instrument that allows you to set a cruising altitude and be warned if you drift more than 200 feet above the desired cruising altitude or drift 200 feet below the cruising altitude that you've picked. Again, once it's engaged, the cruising altitude or reference cruising altitude is 4,970 feet. And we can demonstrate what the instrument will do when it's in altitude alert mode by changing the air pressure going into the altimeter and showing what happens. We'll decrease the air pressure right now to show a higher altitude. Again, we're back to our regular altitude, and now we will increase the air pressure to show a lower altitude. And you notice that the instrument will flash the display very brightly, and then there's also an option to have a audio buzzer or a warning light on your instrument panel, and there's actually an electrical connection on the instrument that will allow you to hook that up. We'll take the instrument out of the altitude alert function, and let's go over and demonstrate what will happen and show what happens when we change the barometer settings. Before we do that, I'll go over the other buttons that we have. Again, we have the function button to step through our functions. We have the up and down buttons, and then we have the AA altitude alert button, which is also used as an enter button. Right now the instrument is set for a front panel display brightness control, and what we can do is use the up and down arrows when we're in the altitude mode or the mode C mode to change the brightness of the display. Right now we're at the lowest brightness setting, but we can raise the brightness and lower the brightness using the up and down arrows right now. And again, we have our altitude alert function, which we can turn on and off. The next thing we're going to do is go into the optional settings of the instrument, but before that we can just demonstrate real quickly setting the barometer to a different value. Say if we set it to a higher air pressure, we can enter that pressure by pressing the AA button, using that as an enter button. What happens when we change the barometer value? Well, the barometer actually changes or adjusts the altitude display, and the new field altitude will be the new altitude display, which is now at 5,070 feet. Again, that's because we've actually changed our barometer setting. Let's go back to the right barometer setting, but instead of using the barometer adjustment, we can actually go to the field altitude adjustment. Using the up and down arrows, we can change the altitude in 10-foot increments. We'll bring it down to the 4,970 feet that we know we happen to be at. Enter it. And now we're displaying the correct altitude. The next thing we'll get into is the optional settings of the instrument, and what we'll do to get to those is press and hold the function button for about 8 seconds, and you see we go into what we call level 1 or menu level 1. Menu level 0 is the main operating mode of the instrument. Right now we can see that we are in an option which happens to be the brightness control setting. Right now we're set, as we showed before, for a front panel brightness control. We can change that to a photocell brightness control. Let's go ahead and do that. We do that by selecting it and pressing the enter button. We'll step through these functions real quick. We get to the double back arrow or a return to main function, which will bring us back to menu level 0 or the main functions. We're now in a photocell brightness control mode, and there is a photocell on the front of the instrument, and we can demonstrate what happens now. We don't have control over the brightness now with the front panel buttons, but we can control the brightness by changing the ambient light. And we'll do that with a flashlight. As you can see, as the light around the instrument gets higher, it'll automatically raise the brightness of the display to compensate. Let's go ahead and change that mode again. Again, we can go into our options menu by holding the button down. We're now in photocell mode. Another mode we can use to change the brightness is an external mode, and that way you have an electrical signal in the back of the instrument that can change the brightness. And you would use that if you wanted to have a potentiometer or a brightness control knob on your panel. And that allows you to wire that in to actually do the brightness control on the instrument. Let's go ahead and bring it back to the front panel. We'll enter that, and now we're back in front panel mode. Our next function, which we can do by stepping on the function button. Right now we're in, it's a little confusing, but it means AD off. AD is an auto dim function. If you have the instrument set for a front panel control, you can turn the AD or auto dim function on, and then the photocell will automatically bump up the brightness if you go from a low bright or a low light level to a high bright level or a high light level condition, or if you happen to be in a high light condition and go into a low light condition such as night flying, the instrument will automatically dim itself one time, and then after that you can still use the front panel controls to control the brightness. We'll go ahead and leave that off right now. And again, we can turn it on and off, but as long as we don't hit the AA or the enter button, it won't remember the new values anyway, so it's automatically staying off. The next function that we have is a strobe function. This is an option that can be set because some transponders, mostly older ones, use another digital control line to receive its altitude information. It's called a strobe line, and the transponder uses the strobe line to request altitude information. In that case, the altitude encoder is only going to send its altitude information if the strobe line is pulled active. And the reason you would use that with this instrument is that it would not be looking at false values. It would only be looking at altitude values when it sees the strobe signal. Again, you can see we timed out of the options settings, and again we're back to our normal altitude function. Let's just get back into our strobe setting again real fast. Again, we can go to the strobe setting and set it on and or off. Again, most modern transponders and altitude encoders don't use the strobe line, so the default setting for the instrument is off. Then we get to our last function again, which is a return to main function. There is a second menu level setting, and we recommend that you only go there if you happen to be a trained avionics technician and have proper calibration equipment. But the instrument can be calibrated at 0 feet of altitude and 30,000 feet of altitude. To do that, you press and hold the function button until you're in menu level 1. Press and hold the button again for 8 seconds or so. And now we're in the menu level 2, or the calibration settings. And we have two options. We can set a calibration setting for 0 feet and a calibration setting for 30,000 feet. Again, this would normally be done by a trained avionics shop, and they would have equipment that would hook up to your static port and set the air pressure for a calibrated value of 0 feet and a calibrated value of 30,000 feet, and then you would use the enter button to set the new calibration values. There is some software on here that actually will prevent you from entering a calibration value unless the air pressure is very, very close to where it needs to be calibrated. Again, we reset back to the main display. Let's just show what would happen if somebody accidentally tried to calibrate the instrument. Since we're at around 5,000 feet, we're at neither 0 feet or 30,000 feet. So if we actually try to set a calibration value, you'll notice nothing happens. Same thing if we try to calibrate the instrument for 30,000 feet. So that's a little bit of a safeguard to keep somebody from accidentally getting into this mode and calibrating the instrument. Again, we recommend that that only be done by an avionics shop. And it shouldn't have to be done too often, but it does allow you, if over time your altitude values aren't quite what they should be and the instrument requires calibration. So let's just go back. We can go back either one menu level to the other option settings or two menu levels to the main menu. So let's just go ahead and go back using this function. Now we're in the options settings. Go through our option settings, and now we are in the return to main, and we're back where we started, and again we're showing a digital altitude with 10-foot resolution. And that concludes the quick demo of the MCE100 Mode C encoder. Thank you.